Hi, I'm Darren Shan. I live in Limerick on the west coast of Ireland. I've published over 50 books over the last 20 years or so, but today I'm going to be talking about my new series, Archibald Lox, the first 3 books of which went on sale a couple of months ago. The idea for Archibald Lox came to me one day when I was walking over a bridge in London. I spotted a young woman walking towards me, and she was pulling strange faces, twisting her nose and lips around. It was bizarre. It was like a fly had got caught up her nose or something. I started wondering, why might she be doing that? And something in the back of my head whispered to me and said, well, maybe she's from another universe and she's trying to open a door from our universe to that one, and those facial gestures serve as the key. This idea intrigued me, particularly the idea of what would happen if someone followed her through into that other universe, if one of us had the power to somehow open that lock as well. And that set me thinking, and the result was this multi-book series about a young locksmith called Archibald Lox. I've wanted to be a writer since I was 5 or 6 years of age. I was born in London, even though I've spent most of my life in Ireland, and even when I was still living in London, which was up until the age of 6, even at that young age, I loved telling stories. I just found I had a knack for it. It was a skill I had. I could make my friends laugh or make them squirm. It was something I loved doing. There were lots of other things I would have liked to have tried my hand at, but writing was what I loved most, and luckily it was what I was best at. So yeah, pretty much all my life I've been working at trying to be a writer. When I get an idea for a book, I let it germinate for a while inside my head. It bounces around. I ask questions. I try to find other ideas to put with it. I try to develop a story out of it. Sometimes that can be a really quick process. It can be a matter of days. Other times it can take months or even years. It can really be that long. There's some ideas I've had for books more than a decade ago, which are still bouncing around and I haven't quite figured out yet. When I get to a point where I feel I'm ready to sit down and start planning, then I'll usually get a few sheets of paper and start writing up a rough plot outline. Sometimes I'll then break it down into chapter headings, maybe a little description of what would happen in each chapter. It usually won't be exactly the way it finishes up being in the book, but I like to give myself as much of a guideline as I can before starting out, as that makes the first draft process a lot easier than it otherwise can be. I have done it with very, very little plotting in advance. Cert the Freak, for instance, I jotted the idea for that down on half a sheet of A4 paper and just worked from there. But usually I like to do a fair bit of planning before I start writing. When I get to the point where I'm ready to start the first draft, I sit down and just go for it, hell for leather. I try and do 10 pages a day, 5 days a week, until I get to the end. Then, once the first draft is finished, I like to leave it for a while. I go and normally work on some other material. Then I come back to it after a break of maybe a few months or several months, and I'll do my first edit. Then I'll leave it again, go and work on other stuff, return to it after several more months, do another edit, and so on and so on. I usually do at least 6 or 7 edits of a book. Sometimes it can be longer. The first Archibald Lox volume, books 1, 2 and 3, I actually went through about 12 or 13 times because it was such a long and complex world that I was creating. I just needed to go back through that again and again and again and fine tune it and cut out things that didn't need to be there for the reader, try to make it as action-packed and pacey as I could while still retaining the flavour of this other world which I very carefully created in the first draft. On average, any one book of mine will take at least 2 or 3 years from when I start writing to when I do my very final edit. Occasionally that can be much, much longer. The first Archibald Lox volume, I think it was about 5 or 6 years from when I began book 1 to when I did my final bit of editing work. Stephen King is my favourite author. I read Salem's Lot when I was much too young to be reading that sort of a book. I was, I think, 11 or 12, possibly even slightly younger. Back in those days, there were no horror books written for children, and as a lover of horror, like many others of my era, I made that leap up to adult horror a bit too early. But yeah, I've been reading Stephen King ever since. I keep up with him. He's the one author I've followed for more than 30 years, about 35 years. I just love his work. I'd love to sit down with him one day and have a good old chat, a good chin wag. I was actually in a room with him several years ago. He was doing an event in New York with J.K. Rowling and John Irving, which I went to, and I was able to go to the after show party. And he was in there, but I didn't go up to speak to him. I was too nervous, I must admit, and also he was eating a meal, and I didn't want to disturb a man while he was eating. As I know, I hate being disturbed if I'm eating, so I just focus on the food. But hopefully, one day our paths will cross again. Hopefully next time he won't be eating, but hopefully I'll find the courage in myself to go up to him and say, "Hi Stephen, I'm Darren. I'm a huge fan." My best piece of advice for aspiring writers is to write. It sounds like a no-brainer, but you'd be amazed the number of young authors, I think, who don't actually go for it. Who spend a lot of time thinking about it and planning it and bouncing ideas about and talking about it with their friends, but don't actually sit down and write. There's no magic involved being a writer. The more you write, the more you learn, the better you get. It's all about hard work. The more work you put in, the more you get out, and the quicker you'll get it out. So yeah, if you want to be a writer, just sit down there and start writing. You'll write bad stories, you'll make mistakes, but you'll learn from those. You'll improve. And as you go on, you'll get better and better and better. It's a gradual process. Every writer learns throughout a career. We're always learning new things. But we only learn those things by writing. So yeah, crack on, make no excuses, and good luck. My favourite underappreciated book that I've written is The Thin Executioner. It's a one-off fantasy book that I released maybe about a decade or so ago. Out of all the books I've written, it's my favourite. I can't say exactly why, it's just the book that means the most to me. If I could only keep one book out of everything I've ever done, it would be The Thin Executioner. It does have a strong cult following. I get every so often a letter or an email from a fan saying they've read it, they love it, it's the favourite book that I've written, could we have more like it? How come nobody knows it exists? And the answer is my publishers never really shared my love for it. It was very different to my other books. I'm known for short, fast-paced horror books like Cirque Freak and Lord Loss and Zombie, whereas The Executioner was a long, languid tale inspired by the adventures of Huckleberry Finn and given a fantasy setting. It's, yeah, they liked it, but they didn't love it. And they didn't give it a really big push. They just sort of put it out there and left it to its own devices. So word of mouth has been strong, and over the years it has grown, as I say, a very loyal following. But it's always one that I think could have a much wider fan base if people knew that it actually existed. I love ice cream. My favourite flavour keeps changing over the years. A while back it used to be strawberry cheesecake. These days it's maybe salted caramel. Although when I'm travelling around, if I go to a gelateria, I usually get the vanilla, because I think that's the real test of an ice cream shop. What's its vanilla like? My favourite pizza topping is pepperoni. My favourite movie, there are lots and lots of movies that I love. I'm a big movie fan. One that does always come to mind is Salem's Lot, a TV adaptation of Stephen King's novel that was made in the 1970s, because it was one of the first horror films for adults that I saw as a child, and it scarred me for life, but in a very good, enjoyable way. My favourite dessert, probably strawberry cheesecake. Although actually I did have pumpkin cheesecake once in San Francisco, which was the most delicious dessert I've ever had. Well, I've never had it since. My favourite snack to eat when I'm writing, I'd always used to be have little sweets to chew on, like Werther's Originals or Emeralds. They're a sweet here in Ireland. But these days I try not to eat snacks while I'm writing. The pounds are piling on in my old age, so I've got to be careful. My favourite drink is actually Pepsi Max. I can of Pepsi Max pretty much every day of the week. It's my little tipple treat to myself. If I was a world wrestling superstar, I think my entrance music would be Here Comes the Sun by the Beatles. I'd like to walk into some lovely, nice melodic music, then get medieval on their ass. My spirit animal, I'd love to think it would be a proud, lonesome wolf, but in all honesty, it would probably be a Pomeranian dog. If I was a writer, I would have some job that I didn't care about in the slightest, because I would still want to be writing in my spare time, and that's what I would want to be directing my energies. I've only had one proper job since leaving university, and I worked for a couple of years in a TV centre in Ireland, turning on people's movies and sports, or turning them off if they didn't pay. But yeah, it was a job that I wasn't invested in, which left me free at the weekends to come home and spend my weekends writing. I wouldn't want a proper career, because that would take up too much of my energy and focus. And that energy and focus, even if I wasn't getting paid to write, I would want to be directing into writing stories. I write for fun. I often say it. I do write for fun. I'm very lucky. I've been paid to write it for a long time now. But yeah, writing, I just can't think of a time when I wouldn't be writing. When I'm not reading or writing, I love movies and TV. I watch a lot of movies, a lot of TV shows. Not as much as I used to, since I had 2 children. They take up a lot of my focus these days. But yeah, I'm a big lover of the history of cinema. And I love how TV has developed over the last 20 or 30 years. And all the different really cool TV shows there have been. I love travel, although not obviously right now. I love going to concerts and football matches, soccer matches, as you say in the States. But again, obviously not right now. Galleries, got very interested in art over the last 20 or so years. I would go to lots of museums and galleries when I would visit cities. And yeah, and eating. I love fine dining, also down and dirty meals. I always like experiencing the different flavours of the world when I travel around it. I would much rather an endless winter to an endless summer. Not a big fan of summers. It's too bright, too much light. I like nice short days when the evenings close in, and I can settle down and watch a movie, or go out and meet some friends and go to a pub or a football match or something like that. So yeah, winter is much more to my taste than summer. I like a little bit of summer. I like some when I travel on a 1 or 2 week holiday. But yeah, it's not my thing. I am a night owl, as that last answer has probably prepared you for. And as for tea or coffee, I like neither. My hot drink of choice is a hot chocolate, which I drink